Collapse and ecocide as religious failure. God blind, biosphere deaf. I'm Michael Dowd, and I'm recording this just a few days before the autumn equinox. How we relate to this reality, our biosphere, our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end, is the fundamental thing. And if religion is not leading in helping us have a humble relationship to that reality, then we destroy ourselves. That's what has happened throughout human history. Turns out that our name or names for this reality is fundamental in determining whether we have a hubris, arrogant, or a humble way of relating. I love these quotes from Thomas Berry, one of my great mentors. He said, "We are talking only to ourselves. We're not talking to the rivers. We're not listening to the wind and the climate. Most of the disasters that are happening now are a consequence of that spiritual deficit." And then he also said, "Our fundamental problem is that we no longer listen to what the earth, its landscape and atmospheric phenomena, its mountains and valleys, and all the flora and fauna of the planet are telling us." I'm a religious naturalist. I'm on the board of advisors of the Religious Naturalist Association. Our core understanding is that we take nature to heart. I have no supernatural or otherworldly beliefs at all. I don't deny or have any problem with others who do, but I don't. I love these three quotes. Alice O'Keefe says, "Even if we can't escape its consequences, it's not too late to escape the mindset that brought us here." Vandana Shiva, "In nature's economy, the currency is not money, it is life." And then Robin Wall Kimmerer, "To be native to a place, we must learn to speak its language. It's not just land that is broken, but more importantly, our relationship to land." So I just completed recording earlier today the main drivers of collapse, ecocide, and likely near-term human extinction. Here they are in a nutshell: civilization, science and technology, progress and development, and growth economics. I see these as the four main drivers of collapse, ecocide, and likely near-term human extinction. And the foundation of all of them is anthropocentrism. That is human-centered worldviews and human-centered values, and specifically human-centered religion. By civilization, I mean extractive, exploitative, totalitarian, city-based narcissism. Man, conqueror of nature, and electricity. We think that science and technology, this idea of controlling nature, controlling our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end. And electricity is a good example. Is that, a lot of people think that what we need to do is shift how we generate electricity from fossil fuel to so-called renewables. No, the problem is electricity generation itself. Progress and development, how we measure wealth and well-being and success. We're goal-seeking animals. We're going to have some goal, but do we measure wealth, well-being, and success in life-centered terms or in human-centered terms? That's the fundamental things that makes a difference. And then growth economics, money systems, trade systems that reward and incentivize evil. So I'm calling the thing that ultimately is the source that you don't have anthropocentrism unless you first have God blindness and biosphere death. If you're not God blind and biosphere deaf, you wouldn't see anthropocentrism or human centeredness. So that's why I'm focusing. This is the most radical, this is the most bold video that I'll have ever created. And yet, my hunch is that for many people, you're going to not be surprised. You'll probably think, I've kind of known this all along. The ecocidal delusion is that God is either otherworldly or doesn't exist, and that nature, the flip side of that is that nature is a lesser it, not a greater thou. Ecocentrism, or what I call sometimes eco-theocentrism, is that we belong to the land. That's that humility. Anthropocentrism, human-centeredness, is the land belongs to us. All sustainable cultures, all truly pro-future cultures had what I'm calling an eco-theo worldview, where the ecos was related to as divine, and the theos, the world of spirit or whatever, was embodied or incarnate or manifest or expressed in and through the living world. Eco-theo. Here's my eco-theo credo. This is actually something that many perhaps most religious naturalists align with. I think tens of millions of people basically align with this. Reality is my God. And by God, what I'm meaning very specifically is reality with a personality. I'm not meaning a person outside reality. God, G, Earth emoji D. I'm meaning reality personified. And some people say, well, you can't just personify reality. Well, of course you can. I love Philip K. Dick's definition. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. And whatever else, time and nature are real to that degree. And if our understanding of the divine doesn't include our understanding of what's ultimately our concern, our ultimate priority, doesn't include time and nature, we're sunk. One of the most important, if not the most important, scientific discovery about religion in the last several hundred years is personification, that our brains are personification machines. That's what we do, is we give human characteristics to what's more than human. Wendell Berry said it well. He said, nature is party to all our deals and decisions, and she has more votes, a longer memory, and a sterner sense of justice than we do. That's personification. James Hillman, one of the most famous psychologists of the last 70 years, said it this way. He said, loving is a way of knowing, and for love to know, it must personify. Personifying is thus the heart's mode of knowing. It's not a lesser, primitive way of apprehending, but a finer one. To enter myth, we must personify, and to personify carries us into myth. Now, by myth, he's not meaning an untrue story. He's meaning it the way Joseph Campbell did, a narrative that puts us in accord with the nature of reality. In fact, James Hillman said rather famously that you can't even understand the world's myths and religions if you don't understand our brain's propensity to give human characteristics to what's more than human. Personification. Hollywood and Conservation International got the memo on personification. Over the last decade, there's now, I think, 14 or 15 of these nature is speaking videos. Julia Roberts speaks as Mother Nature. Harrison Ford speaks as the ocean. They're not speaking about, they're the voice of those beings. And whatever we mean by the word God, for those of us who even choose to use the word God, it's got to include all of this. So reality is my God, my ultimate commitment. Evidence is my scripture. Evidence is the main word reality is revealing itself to us. The epic of evolution is my creation story. The history of the universe is our first and only globally produced evidence-based creation story. Ecology is my theology. Integrity is my spiritual path. And by integrity, I mean all the practices and exercises that help me live in right relationship to reality. So reality is my God, evidence is my scripture. The epic of evolution is my creation story. Ecology is my theology. Integrity is my spiritual path. And come home is my core message. And come home to who or come home to what? Well, come home to reality. Come home to life. Come home to nature. Come home to your true self. I believe that we are in the great reckoning. I love this quote from Robert Louis Stevenson. Sooner or later, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. There's no supernatural being that's pissed off at us. It's a natural consequences. But it's also, or at least it can be, the great homecoming. Humanity, the prodigal species, coming home to reality after squandering our inheritance. And I believe this is true even if we go extinct in the near term, which I think is highly likely. So, civilization, extractive, exploitative, city-based, totalitarian narcissism, science and technology, knowledge and tools that benefit only us, aim to control God, aim to control life, and create toxins that do not become food for our kin. Progress and development is the third main driver of collapse, ecocide, and likely near-term human extinction. Human-centered measures of wealth and well-being within a worldview that sees evolution as progressive, as increasing complexity. I believe that for 12 years. I now believe it's diluted. Growth economics, any and all systems of money and trade that incentivize evil and relate to the biosphere, relate to primary reality, God, Gaia, as merely a larder and a toilet. And anthropocentrism, or what some ecofeminists and others are called androcentrism. It's not just human-centeredness, it's man-centeredness that civilizations specialize in, treating the biosphere, treating our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end as it, not thou, eventuating in an idolatrous global economic system. Now, idolatrous global economic system? What the hell am I talking about? Well, Growth economics is not science, it's an idolatrous religion. Who do you think said that? Well, it's something that I've said many times, but this is Herman Daly, former World Bank senior economist from 1988 to 94, the granddaddy of ecological economics, is calling growth economics not science, it's an idolatrous religion. Idolatrous religion? Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. And so, while the end of the world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe that the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunities for profit. Turns out that Herman Daly has been countering idolatrous economics for 45 years. His amazing books, I'm not going to bother talking about these right now, but he's just like literally the granddaddy of ecological economics. And I just highly recommend his work, even though he's still got a little bit of hopium in there. But nonetheless, I mean, who doesn't practically? But he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in Sustainable Development, along with Greta Thunberg and Pope Francis recently. So he's been at this a long time. Here's the longer quote. Growth economics is not science. It's an idolatrous religion. It is not science because it flies in the face of the first and second laws of thermodynamics and ignores ecology. It is idolatry because it conceives of mankind as an all-powerful creator rather than as a creature subject to limits. When he's using the word idolatry, and as I use the word idolatry, I'm not meaning bowing down to statues or believing in the wrong God. What I mean is human-centeredness. It's anthropocentrism or androcentrism, man-centeredness. It's having an unreal notion of God, a divinity that's not synonymous with reality. It's failing to honor primary reality, God, the biosphere, the living world, as primary. We are derivative. We're an expression. We grow out of the body of life in the same way that apples grow out of an apple tree. Taking primary reality, that is the soil, the forest, the water, the climate, taking that for granted is idolatry. Having an ultimate authority that leads us to betray and condemn the future. I see three major forms of religious idolatry and then secular idolatry. In the religious world, I see idolatry of the written word, idolatry of the otherworldly, and idolatry of beliefs. Idolatry of the written word is where we think our best map of reality is frozen in time in some ancient text. Idolatry of the otherworldly is where we think ultimate reality resides is only outside time and nature. And idolatry of beliefs is where we privilege beliefs over knowledge. But there are secular forms of idolatry. Idolatry of progress, growth, development. Idolatry of human intelligence and agency. We can do it. The myth of the almighty we. And this idea of man, conqueror of nature, idolatry of technology. So secular and religious forms of human-centeredness. I believe that the theism versus atheism debate is a form of collective insanity. You got millions of people debating whether or not God exists or whether or not God is real. One real reality, the one real God, namely reality, our primary reality, we've been disrespecting and treating as merely a larder and a toilet. And yet all these people debating whether or not God exists. And we're already experiencing consequences of biblical proportion. It's just insane. Two of my scientific heroes really discuss a lot at the evolutionary and ecological purpose of religion and the religious necessity of science. David Sloan Wilson is a dear collegial friend. We've stayed at his house. Ed Wilson, these are now, they're not related in any close way, but their books, many of their books really focus on the evolutionary and ecological purpose of religion and the religious necessity of science. In fact, David Sloan Wilson's got this wonderful and very helpful, necessary distinction between practical truth or practical knowledge, practical realism, and factual truth or factual knowledge, factual realism. Practical truth is when you act as if it's true, you experience ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness, usually in that order. Factual truth is what science specializes in, but if factual truth doesn't help us to live in right relationship to reality, then it can create technology that's totally ecocidal and devastating and self-destructive as well. And it turns out, as David Sloan Wilson makes the point, that practical truth will outcompete factual truth in an evolutionary arms race every day. And so that's why when religion is asleep at the wheel, which is what it has been for now, actually a few thousand years, but I used to say that religion is asleep at the wheel, and it's actually worse than that. At least now in the 21st century, half of religion is gagged and tied in the trunk, and the other half of religion is in the back seat cheering on the psychopathic politicians that are driving us over the cliff. Overshoot, collapse, and ecocide are fundamentally a moral and religious failure. That's why I'm creating this video. Because good and evil are not relative. Good and evil are not simply context dependent. Good and evil have always, in healthy societies, been applied to what we today call ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. Good is what promotes or encourages or supports ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. Evil is what diminishes or destroys or degrades ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. This is not moral rocket science. We don't need 10 commandments to tell us this. Aldo Leopold said it really well. This is an ecocentric understanding of good and evil. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the stability, the integrity, and the beauty of the life community. A thing is wrong when it tends otherwise. Joseph Brodsky was a Russian polymath, taught at some of the most prestigious schools in North America, Canada, and the United States. He also won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1987. And he famously said, "You Americans are so naive. You think evil is going to come into your houses wearing big black boots. It doesn't happen like that. Look at the language. It begins in the language." Wittgenstein said, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Because your God is whatever you put your faith or trust in, your ultimate concern. And this isn't just Michael Dowd saying this, arguably the most influential theologian of the 20th century. Paul Tillich famously identified faith as your ultimate concern. So if technology or the market is your ultimate concern, that's your God. And if that is not our God, we're sunk. If that's not our ultimate concern, we're done. It's only a matter of time. This is our literal, biophysical, and universal creator, sustainer, and end. That's a fact. That's not a belief. And how we name that reality, how we think about that reality, how we relate to that reality, whether humility or hubris, is what determines whether it's sustainable or ecocidal, unsustainable. So how we name it, God, G, Earth emoji D, right? And I have that way because any concept of the divine that doesn't include our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end is an ecocidal notion of God. It's not about beliefs of anything. But relating to our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end, the biosphere, as God, as divine, well, that evokes humility. Whereas if it's merely the environment, well, that evokes hubris. And the ancient Greek definition of hubris, the overweening pride of the doomed. This should be understood. We should all know this, but we're not taught this. We're not taught this in high school or college or anywhere else, certainly not our churches or synagogues or anywhere else. I consider it religion 101. It's sustainability 101. Religion as control mechanism in sustainable cultures. Teddy Goldsmith was the one who first articulated this in his book, The Stable Society. Edward Goldsmith, Teddy Goldsmith, was the founder and the publisher of the Ecologist magazine for 40 years. And here in The Stable Society, and then in his magnum opus, The Way, an Ecological Worldview, he basically takes a look at 500 to 600 years of anthropological evidence and says, what are the main differences between truly sustainable, like not faux or delusional greenwash sustainable, but what are the true differences between truly sustainable cultures that can live in place without destroying place, countless generations, and those that consistently destroy the place? What are the differences? Well, he called religion or lifeways the control mechanism. That is, it was that aspect of culture that spoke with moral authority that the future will not be compromised by the present. And this is what I'm about to share is from the table of contents in that book. Technology in traditional societies, in sustainable, stable, pro-future societies, technology is in accord with the needs of the biosphere. Settlements are in accord with the needs of the biosphere. The economy is in accord with the needs of the biosphere. Education, community, everything is in accord with the needs of the biosphere. And it turns out that religion needs science and evidence needs a moral voice. And this can't happen. This will not happen when the biosphere is exploited as it rather than honored as thou. And this is obvious when we remember the nested nature of reality, that we are part of a nested universe that should be considered divine from our perspective. Subatomic particles within atoms, within molecules, within cells, within organisms, all the way up and all the way down. It's nested. And we are made up of smaller, creative, intelligent realities that we rely on completely, like our microbiome, for example. And we are part of and dependent upon larger, creative, intelligent realities that we don't exist without. That's what I mean by primary realities, everything inside us and everything outside us that we don't exist without. Sustainable means faithful. Unsustainable means unfaithful. Now, faithful to who or faithful to what? Well, faithful to that, faithful to primary reality. And unsustainable means unfaithful to time, unfaithful to nature, unfaithful to the body of life upon which we depend. So really, you could say that the fundamental law of sustainability is relate to the larger body of life as divine or perish. Or an indigenous way of saying it, relate to the community of life as kin or perish, sometimes known as a kin-centric universe. Daniel Wildcat said it well: we live among relatives, not resources. Thomas Berry along similar lines. The universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. The environment, after all, is not our surroundings. It is our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end. So sustainable means faithful, faithful to the past, faithful to the future, and faithful to the body of life upon which we depend. The first 95% of human history, that is obviously a simplification, but I think it's really insightful. The first 200,000 years, more or less, 10,000 generations, right? You go back further than that to Homo habilis. But the essential stance of virtually all pro-future, that is ecocentric or life-centered, kin-centric, land-honoring cultures, is that wealth and well-being is measured by the year-by-year, decade-by-decade health and vitality of the soil, forests, waters, life, and everything the culture or society needs to survive and thrive. It preserves the well-being of the systems upon which they depend, upon pain of death or ostracizing. God first, or life first, if you don't like the word God. But again, I'm meaning reality with a personality, not a person outside reality. Unsustainable means unfaithful. It means exploitative. This is just the last 5% of human history, roughly the last 8,000 years, last 400 generations. Man first. And I say man rather than human because it's usually been men. It's very patriarchal, or it has been in terms of most civilizations. And the only exceptions, the only major exceptions, are ecocentric civilizations like the Kogi Indians, Kogi, in Colombia. And here's the pattern we see over and over and over and over again. The well-being of the elites and ruling class, what gets called wealth and progress, goes up, obviously not for the slaves. And the well-being of the bioregion and the habitat, the carrying capacity, that is the real wealth, goes down. And where they cross is Overshoot, the single most important book I've ever read. In fact, you can't understand our present, how we got here, nor what's realistic about the future if you've not read William Catton's Overshoot. Yes, I know I sound like a fundamentalist on that one, but it's the truth. The world divides for me into those who've read Overshoot and understand it and get it, and those who don't. Because if you've not read Catton's Overshoot, and I've recorded the whole thing, it's all free available up online, but you're going to have an unrealistic vision of the future. And again, this is the ecocidal pattern of more than 80 human-centered, anthropocentric civilizations, as I detailed in my last video. Religion is the control mechanism of stable, sustainable societies. And what he means by mechanism is just system cybernetics. He means religion or life ways is that aspect of culture that speaks with moral authority that the future will not be compromised by the present. Here are the fundamental patterns as Teddy Goldsmith distilled them. Three main things that all sustainable cultures or pro-future or cultures that don't destroy themselves had in common. The first is that all benefits and all real wealth come from the living biosphere, what I'm calling God, G, Earth emoji, D. that has come from Gaia, come from God, come from life, the biosphere. That God or reality will continue to dispense these benefits and wealth only if life's critical order, that is, its essential integrity or way, is honored and preserved. Therefore, the fundamental role of religion or life ways is to ensure that the culture or society remains faithful to the past, faithful to the future, and faithful to the body of life, faithful to God, by fiercely preserving the integrity of the ecosphere and the critical order of the cosmos, the way. And that was his magnum opus book, The Way, an Ecological Worldview. And he did this through four main reasons: God first, or life first; seventh generation; sacred limits; and consequence capture. And I have exclamations because these were enforced upon pain of death or ostracizing. These were that sacred. Sacred simply means it's more important than us. It's more important than you. It can't be bought or sold. That's what's sacred. So here I consider these the four laws of true, genuine sustainability: God first, or life first; seventh generation; sacred limits; and consequence capture. Life first, or God first, means ecocentric, not anthropocentric, not human-centered measures of progress and success. We right now have an insane system where we measure progress and success in human-centered terms: how well kings or corporations are doing, how well nation states are doing, the gross domestic product, GDP. These are all insane measures of progress and success. They're ecocidal, only ecocentric. How well is the soil doing decade by decade? How well are the forests doing decade by decade? How well are the other species doing decade by decade? What's the carbon in the atmosphere decade by decade? Those are the only sane measures of wealth, well-being, and success. Seventh generation. Failing to prioritize the future over the present is evil. Sacred limits. Material grace limits are real and must be honored. If we don't, there are logical consequences. And then consequence capture. The impact for good or ill must be mirrored back. This is fundamental. Individuals, corporations, and nation states that do well to the larger common good, or in some way are a blessing to the future, ought to be rewarded. So they're incentivized to do as much good as possible. And individuals, corporations, and nation states that disregard or harm the common good or harm the future ought to be taxed or penalized, or there's moral strictures. And we don't have that system at all right now, and it's too late to do it. And so that's why we have this situation, because we have an economy that doesn't capture the impact for good or ill back to the individual or corporation making the impact. So these are the four true laws of, or the four laws of genuine or true sustainability. So just a few resources. I want to mention these. Sustainable means faithful. The indigenous writers are obviously the best sources here. Robin Wall Kimmerer, New York Times. This book came out like 6 years ago, and it's still in the top 10 of the New York Times bestseller list. Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. Stan Rushworth, Going to Water, Diaspora's Children. He just also co-authored a book with Dar Jamel. He's an amazing Native American elder. And Julia Watson, Low Tech, TEK, is Traditional Ecological Knowledge, Designed by Radical Indigenism. These are fabulous books. But also Western writers. Teddy Goldsmith, I've already mentioned, The Stable Society and The Way. And then Richard Adrian Reese, one of my absolute favorite writers. Because here's the thing, if you Google sustainability, you're going to get insane stuff. Even the Wikipedia page is just totally goofy. They start with civilization, which is one of the drivers of unsustainability. If you want to truly understand sustainable, you got to read Teddy Goldsmith or Rick Reese. And Rick's new book, Wild, Free, and Happy. The whole thing's available for free up on his website. I've recorded the whole thing. It's priceless. There are people who just invariably say, well, we've always been ecocidal. We're just an ecocidal species. No, we're an ecocidal culture. And so if you want to understand the difference between ecocentric cultures and anthropocentric civilizations, that is, humble, faithful cultures, or hubristic and unfaithful civilizations, here are just a few resources. And I'm not going to talk about these. I'm just going to put them here. You can stop this video and look these up. I'll also have these in the description box of the YouTube video, but these are just really helpful resources for anybody who might be deluded in thinking, well, we've always been ecocidal. There's no such thing as any culture that lives sustainable. Nonsense. Here are several book-length treatments of the same topic that are really excellent. Daniel Wildcat's Red Alert, Saving the Planet with Indigenous Knowledge. Well, we're not going to save the planet, but you can ignore the subtitle. It's still a great book. M. Cat Anderson's classic, Tending the Wild, Native American Knowledge and the Management of California's Natural Resources. It truly is a classic, and for great reason. It's one of the more important books in terms of humans living in a mutually enhancing relationship with the biosphere, with what I'm calling God, G, Earth emoji, D. And then a couple of Western authors, Abundant Earth, Eileen Christ, and Christopher Ryan's Civilized to Death. So all of these are great treatments of the difference between ecocentric and anthropocentric civilizations. Now, on that theme, I want to take a look at clean, green, renewable, progress, and other misleading words and concepts that encourage individual and collective evil. Now, again, I'm using the word evil in an ecological way and an evolutionary way. There's nothing relative about good and evil. Good is what promotes or encourages or supports ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. Evil is what diminishes or destroys ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. They're not relative. These are the ecological and evolutionary meanings of these terms, of religious language, of morally laden language. And I shared these three quotes already. These are powerful quotes on this theme. Aldo Leopold, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the life community. A thing is wrong when it tends otherwise. Joseph Brodsky, you Americans are so naive. You think evil is going to come into your houses wearing big black boots. It doesn't happen like that. Look at the language. It begins in the language. And then Wittgenstein, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. So let's come back to these misleading terms that encourage individual and collective evil. Well, clean, green, renewable. Here's the thing. The only clean, green, renewable energy has chlorophyll. If it doesn't have chlorophyll, it's not clean, it's not green, and it's not renewable. In fact, even what gets called renewable are rebuildable technologies. They're not renewable. Progress, sustainable development. Well, progress? Sustainable development? I love these quotes. Human society is inextricably part of a global biotic community. And in that community, human dominance has had and is having self-destructive consequences. The most difficult transition to make is from a human-centered to a life-centered norm of progress. If there's to be any true progress, the entire life community must progress. Any so-called progress of the human at the expense of the larger life community must ultimately lead to a diminishment of human life itself. William Catton and Thomas Berry are two of my most significant mentors. So coming back to these terms, net zero emissions, energy transition, reversing overshoot. There's never been in the history of the, not just human history, but the history of life, any species and any human culture that's been able to reverse the consequences of overshoot. The die-off that occurs after overshoot is not reversing it. That's the natural consequences. Climate solutions, climate fixes, ecological rite of passage, and even the distinction between being optimistic or pessimistic. I love this quote. Oswald Spengler, one of the leading historians of the 20th century, when a civilization is collapsing, optimism is cowardice. And Cyril Connolly along similar lines, optimism and self-pity are the positive and negative poles of modern cowardice. And then Kate Marvel, a climate scientist, we need courage, not hope, to face climate change. Courage is the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. So if you have not already watched my main drivers of collapse, ecocide, and likely NTHE, that is near-term human extinction, if you haven't watched that video, please do so, because it's I kind of assumed that people would have watched that before watching this one. Because these I see as the four main drivers: civilization itself, science and technology, progress and development and growth economics. These are the main causes and drivers of collapse. And undergirding all of them is human-centeredness, anthropocentrism, human-centered worldviews and values, especially human-centered religious worldviews and values. Here are the most important videos I've created in the last few years on this topic and related topics. Sustainability 101. Indigenuity is not optional. The last half of that video, I take the core elements of the Christian tradition and I interpret them in an ecocentric way. So if you're curious about how at least one eco-theologian reinterprets the Christian mythic tradition in light of an ecocentric, life-centered worldview, then check out that video. And this one here, God, owning our error, accepting our fate. So these are the two longer videos that I've done on this. And then short videos, my God, what have we done? Which is what the co-pilot of the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, said, my God, what have we done? And then a little sermon that I did, True Sustainability, Cultivating a Repentant, Pro-Future Heart and Mind. And then my most complete, my most in-depth video, 10 Inevitables, Post-Doom, No Gloom, the all-you-can-eat buffet version. I've also created an appetizer version and a mid-sized meal, but this is the one I recommend. It's 2 hours. It's 6 20-minute segments. And if you only watch one other video of mine ever again, I encourage you to watch that one. This is my main website. All the resources that I'm aware of, the best audio, video, and text resources on any of these topics, you can find there. And I'm always open to adding new things. So if you're aware of something significant, a documentary, blog, or whatever, a podcast that I don't have featured there, please let me know and I'll add it. And we have weekly and twice weekly discussions to help people process all this stuff and adapt and cope and actually support each other in thriving. Because joy, it's possible to have joy even in the midst of collapse and challenges. And then the conversations themselves. I have 85, actually, I think 87 now, post-doom, no gloom conversations, literally with some of the top people in the world who get the big picture, including the scariest of the scary stuff, have done the heart work, and then come through to a place of inspired, local, what I call courageous love and action. And I want to conclude with this note. I want to just focus on promoting permaculture. I'm speaking to you from Heartbeat Farms. I'll say more about that in a minute, but agroecology, indigenuity, regeneration, regenerative agriculture shifts the paradigm from competing with nature to partnering with it, disturbing soil to protecting it, monoculture to diversity, and reductionistic to holistic. And these are 4 post-doom conversations that I highly recommend. David Holmgren, my wife and I both did a conversation with him, Joe Brewer, Denise Rushing, Daniel Christian Wall. These are such inspiring people, brothers and sisters in this great work. David Holmgren is one of the co-founders of Permaculture. And then I'm just mentioning these 2 books. There's a lot of other great ones, but Joe Brewer, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. Peter Bain, I'm actually in his, this is where I'm speaking to you from, is from his house. Heartbeat Farms is where I'm at right now. My van broke down, but if I got to broke down somewhere, be broke down close to 2 men that I love deeply, Keith Johnson and Peter Bain. This is their Heartbeat Farms. And I did a video a few years ago with Peter called Permaculture as Right Relationship to Reality. I highly recommend it. Building topsoil and planting trees while nurturing community is perhaps the most holy work that we can be engaged in. I love this quote from Paul Hawken. There is a rabbinical teaching that says if you're told the world is ending and the Messiah has arrived, first plant a tree, then see if the story is true. My wife is very involved in what Robin Wall Kimmerer is calling helping forest walk. It's known as assisted migration. I love this quote. Action on behalf of life transforms. Because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal, it's not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us. So Connie, my wife, is one of the leading point people in North America on the field of assisted migration, assisting trees in migrating. It's holy work, even if we go extinct in the next decade or 2, which is certainly a possibility. This book just came out 2 years ago. Zach St. George, award-winning journalist, The Journeys of Trees, a story about forests, people, and the future, by W.W. Norton Press. Terrea Guardians is her organization. She does a whole bunch of videos. In fact, if you just Google or go to the Wikipedia page, assisted migration of forests in North America, it's the best introduction to this whole field of assisted migration. Post-doom means kicking the hopium habit. How? By accepting what's factually inevitable. And this is where we need religion to help us do this. All the religions of the world are needed now, not for anything supernatural, otherworldly, but to help guide people in this process of global hospice. Because here's the truth. We're doomed. Now what? See, that's post-doom. There are benefits that only occur when we trust what is inevitable. It's what I call post-doom collapse acceptance. Here are some of the main benefits: clarity over confusion, compassion over blame, and love in action over desperate activism. It helps reprioritize nearly everything around what matters most and what really doesn't. It's like getting a terminal diagnosis. All of a sudden, everything's reprioritized. A calm urgency to get complete with self, family, others, life, and legacy. You're not going to get these benefits if you're still hoping, if you're still in that hopium place, if you're still denying that we're in collapse and it's unstoppable and it's accelerating. Focusing attention on home, family, community, what's local, what's joyful, what's meaningful. Freedom from certain shoulds, oughts, and have-tos, and freedom for coulds, mights, get-tos. Usually an overwhelming gratitude for the gift of simply being alive and aware and able to feel deeply, including feeling grief. It's so vital and so necessary for us to feel grief. As Joanna Macy says, the measure of your grief is the measure of your love. You wouldn't be feeling grief if you didn't feel love. And then an expanded sense of self or identity, and of impermanence and death is sacred. So these are just a few of the benefits of collapse acceptance. In fact, one of my dear colleagues, Karen Perry, collapse awareness is a booby prize. Only acceptance transforms lives. And Karen and I had a post-doom conversation on 15 benefits of collapse acceptance. This is acceptance and post-doom love and action. In fact, Jordan Perry, her husband, 14 post-doom actions, and then the two of them together, getting real about collapse. David Baum interviewed them. So I highly recommend my friends and colleagues, Jordan Perry and Karen Perry. Here are a few others that I just are the cream of the crop, the top of the top. Like if you only take time for watching a few post-doom conversations, here are the ones I suggest to you are must-sees. Kindness in Harsh Times, Catherine Ingram. Her amazing essay, Facing Extinction, long-form essay. And here is a conversation with her students, Kindness in Harsh Times. Joanna Macy and I had a conversation, To Collapse Well. It brought me to tears at the end. One of my most amazing and important colleagues and become friend is Meg Wheatley. Opening to the World is this incredible conversation she had with the late Terry Patton. Terry died just about a year ago. And here's an incredible conversation that she had. And then Solid Ground in an Age of Threat, her conversation with Michael Shaw. So these are two of my favorites, and neither one of them are with me. And then if you only watch one, please, we just watched this the other night again. Daniel Dancer and my wife, Connie Barlow, she adds, because the video wasn't good for a while, so she added tons of his artwork. And this will bring you to tears. If you only make time for one post-doom conversation, please watch this one. You'll appreciate Daniel Dancer, I assure you. An apology and a promise. Again, conversations, resources here. We have post-doom discussions here. And do look at the definitions of doom and post-doom. Thank you for your time and your attention.